just completely like flipped the script for me because that was exactly what like my argument against couples therapy is like you can't be okay in a couple if you're not okay on your own first. Like you
Mhm.
should be on therapy on your own first. And that's exactly it. Like you're listening to a show for those who aren't afraid to admit that they don't know what the hell is going on. This is a safe space to ask any question you may have in order to keep learning and growing every day. Because the truth is, there's no way to know everything. So join me as I talk to people who know a little something about life. But there's a catch. I'll also know nothing about the questions I'm going to ask. Just like in school when there was a suggestion box that the teacher would read out loud, I'll be pulling up the questions without ever seeing them beforehand. Let's just say this should get very interesting. This is Trust Me, I Know Nothing. Wait, what? Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Trust Me, I Know Nothing. By now, I think you know that I am the biggest advocate for therapy. I believe that everyone can benefit from going to therapy in one way or another, but for some reason, when it comes to couples therapy, I have my reservations. Maybe it's because the people that I know that have tried it didn't have positive experiences, or maybe it's because I believe that in order to be okay with someone else, you have to be okay with yourself, and just couples therapy just doesn't seem like the place to talk about your individual problems. But, anyways, you know that I'm always open to learning. So, today I am talking to a couples therapist to see if she can change my mind. So, here we go. In this episode, we're talking about couples therapy. So, I decided to talk to Erin Sweeney. She's a cognitive behavioral therapist with training in couples therapy. So, hey, Erin, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. Right before we started, I was talking to you and I was telling you how, even though I'm super pro therapy, for some reason, couples therapy, it's just not for me. Like, I have my reservations.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to talk about it and see if you could change my mind.
Mhm.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Yeah, perfect. So if you're ready for it, let's jump right into the first question that was sent by our community. Just a reminder, I haven't read these questions before.
Okay.
So we're going to go through all of this together.
All right.
Okay, so the first question is, okay, see, this is funny. Do you recommend starting couples therapy once you're married or before you get married?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say it's dependent on how open people are to it. A lot of times people wait until they are married, but I have worked with some people who are just kind of dating long term. Um, so I guess it depends on if you're both open to it. It's a lot harder to engage in couples therapy or any type of relationship therapy if one person is extremely against it, though. You hit a lot of walls. So whether you're dating, whether you're married, whether you've been together forever, you have to both kind of be on the same page of like, let's try it and see how it goes.
Okay, because
Yeah.
that's one of the things that makes me hesitant about couples therapy is whenever I see friends that aren't married and they want to go to couples therapy, I'm like, you're doomed. Like you're not even married yet and you're going to therapy. But I guess
Mm-hmm.
people do it as like pre-marriage counseling too, right?
Yeah. And sometimes it's to make sure the relationship continues. And sometimes it's really good preventative care if you think of it that way, because it's like, all right, we notice these problems are here right now. We don't know how to communicate effectively. How can we solve this before we take that next step of being married? So sometimes it can be super helpful to like get rid of problems that you guys recognize ahead of time before all like the pressure of getting married and stuff like that's added on top of it.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I can see how that works.
You're like, oh, touche.
Exactly. Okay, but you said that both parties have to be completely committed for it to work. Why do you think people are afraid to attend couples therapy sometimes?
Yeah. I think a lot of times, personally, just having to be the third party person in the room, people feel as though it's going to be like you're ganged up on. So,
Mhm.
like, people are like, oh, the therapist is going to agree with so and tell me how I'm wrong, or vice versa. Or sometimes people are like, I want this person to tell my significant other that they're wrong, so they change. So a lot of times people are like, no, I'm not going to go. What's the point? And on top of all the stigma and things like that about just going to therapy in general, because
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, if we go do this, then we're admitting something's wrong, or we're like, oh, like it's a failure, or like whatever people think in their head. So a lot of times people are very resistant to if it's actually going to do anything.
Okay. Yeah. And what would you say to someone that has this thoughts right now, like they don't feel comfortable going to therapy right now?
I always recommend in the beginning, especially when I first start meeting with couples, I ask if they're seeing their own therapist first.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times what happens is one person, not, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but what I've seen happen is one person is in therapy on their own and the other partner has never seen a therapist on their own. So they don't even know what to expect therapy to be like.
Yeah.
And then you're jumping into couples therapy and they're just like, what the hell is this?
Okay.
So a lot of times I recommend everyone seeing their own therapist first and working on things that they want to do individually and having that third therapist to bring everything kind of together.
You
So if
just,
someone's really hesitant, I'm like, why don't you see what regular therapy is like
yeah,
first before we add another layer to it?
you just completely like flipped the script for me because that was exactly what like my argument against couples therapy is like you can't be okay in a couple if you're not okay on your own first. Like you
Mhm.
should be on therapy on your own first. And that, yeah, that's exactly it. Like maybe if both parties are trying to fix, well, not fix, but like work on themselves, then you can work together. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just
And it's a big thing because when you go to, and I'm a firm believer in this, just as myself and like going to therapy and things like that. There are times we're so frustrated with people in our lives and we can't just tell them. And then we can't just tell them in couples therapy too, right? Like that's opening cans of worms and stuff. And like we're working on goals more in couples therapy. So being able to express our frustrations in a safe space
yeah,
is going to be in our own individual therapy. Like
yeah,
I hate the way they snore and I just want to punch them in the face, right?
yeah,
Like you can't say that in the middle of couples because it's going to be, you're going to feel all that tension.
yeah.
But if you do that in your own, and then you can really focus on the goals when you're in the couples therapy versus going through all the frustrations
Okay.
with that person, because it feels more hostile that way if we don't really have that safe space to vent about stuff that we want to vent about.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes total sense, and that's actually great advice. Do you think couples need to wait till they're like actually fighting before starting couples therapy?
No, I don't know if this is going to be a question later on, but I'll kind of talk about it now. A lot of times people use couples therapy as a last straw.
Yeah,
A lot of times people are like, not necessarily an ultimatum, but they're just like, we don't know what to do anymore. We're just going to do couples therapy. And sometimes people get the misconception that like this is going to fix everything.
yeah,
You go to therapy, so you know anytime we're working on stuff, we're undoing X amount of years of habits, behaviors, thought processes. So if we're at our wits' end and we're just like, all right, it's either divorce or couples therapy, we're setting ourselves up for failure sometimes.
yeah,
So sometimes it's good enough to start sooner if you're like, hey, I don't really know how to talk to this person about certain things that I'm noticing, or we're kind of changing a little bit because we're getting older or whatever. That's a great time to start. Um, I'm only one person, but I personally believe that like therapy is a tool we pick up when we need it and can kind of put it down when we don't.
yeah,
So that's a great thing, right? Like being able to do therapy for a little bit with your significant other, things are pretty good. All right, we're having some problems again. Let's try again and kind of keeping it going. But if we're going in like, all right, this person's going to fix everything, we're going to be fine. It takes a long time.
yeah. And I think people go into therapy in general hoping just like one session and they're gonna get all the answers.
Yeah.
And in my case, my therapist told me like I need at least 6 months for you to tell me everything, and then we can start the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And that's very true. A lot of times I tell people, especially with men, I've noticed um, it'll take about 6 sessions for someone to actually open up about why they're really there.
yeah,
A lot of the time it's just like a little more surface level talk, kind of getting background information. And then eventually someone will just be like, oh, by the way, all of these things happened. And
yeah.
it's like, I would have had no idea. It takes a while to like open up and start really talking about those things because it's vulnerable. Therapy is vulnerable. It's
Yeah,
scary. Talking to a stranger is scary.
exactly.
And
And tell me something. What do you think it's the most common cause for people attending couples therapy?
Ooh, I think it's communication.
Okay.
Other people might say like finances and things like that, but I think communication is the stem of everything.
Yeah,
Because if we're not communicating about what's going on, we're everything else is going to pile on top of that, like communication piece.
exactly. Because it's the root of everything. Like if you're not communicating correctly, then you're gonna have problems in finance and in your sex life and like every
Yeah,
problems.
everything.
Okay. What are the main challenges a couple may face when they start therapy?
Ooh. Um, I think breaking past habits is a big one. So when I was working with couples, or even if I'm seeing an individual and trying to walk them through like their relationship outside of session, um, having that person kind of stop and not just react when a person's talking is a huge thing because we get so used to that when we're so used to arguing
Yeah.
that we're just like going to cut the person off and start defending ourselves and not really listening and doing all those things. So breaking down those habits at first is so frustrating and hard for couples.
Yeah.
And it can be really, really challenging to kind of continue that outside of like the therapy office and like the therapy space.
Yeah, because I'm guessing it's just human instinct to feel attacked and just trying to defend yourself. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, yeah, even when you're in therapy on your own, whenever your therapist confronts you with something, you just try to like protect yourself or defend yourself. I can't even imagine having someone else in the room. Like it's
Yeah.
so, well, yeah, you're completely open to everything. What would you say is your main goal whenever you receive a new couple?
I kind of attack it like what their goal is. So I've actually had couples and had different kinds of goals, which is kind of interesting and cool to see. Like I've experienced a couple before that wanted to divorce, but civilly. So they wanted to learn how to communicate effectively, like through the divorce, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Um, but sometimes it's people's goals of like trying to keep the relationship together, deciding if they want to get married, deciding if it's time to end the relationship, or just like overall just trying to be healthier.
Mhm.
So a lot of times it's kind of figuring out where the couple's at and then kind of judging what goals we can do based on that. And that's a huge piece of it, trying to figure out if like they both need individual therapy first before we can start tackling these things and stuff like that. But
Yeah, and see if they both have the same goal because
yeah.
they can both go in there and have different mindsets, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. Because one person can come in and be like, I'm completely done with this relationship. I'm just checking a box. Another person can be like, I need this. I really want to make sure this works.
Yeah.
Other people are just kind of like, I'm here just because.
Yeah.
So it really depends on kind of what they're coming in for.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's great. Oh, this one's cool. Do you think that social media has affected the way people relate to each other, like in a couples therapy scenario? Like, do you run into a lot of social media problems in couples?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've noticed the trend a lot more with especially like my younger couples. But I've actually noticed a trend with some of my older couples as well, just because it's been more not necessarily like people talking to people on social media. That's more my younger couples,
Yeah.
but some of my more mature couples, they're constantly on their phones and they
Okay.
talk about how each other's always on their phone and like ignoring the other person, or they're sitting next to each other trying to have more time together and they're both just on their phones checking social media and like texting and all this other stuff. So it's definitely put a rift in a lot of people's relationships, like the more screen time we have. And then I've also heard a lot of couples complain about people not enjoying the moments because they're too busy trying to like take
Capture it.
videos or take pictures or all these things. So they're not actually enjoying their time together. It's like, wait, go stand over there. We got to get a picture for Instagram and do all these things. And that's been causing a lot of like disconnect between people.
Okay. Which is funny because the whole point of social media is to connect people, but
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I've also had, and this was completely different from what you're talking about, but I had a friend introduce me to their boyfriend, and they were saying like how their friends shouldn't add their significant others on social media because that's respect. Like if I add my friend's boyfriend on social media, I'm disrespecting the relationship. I was, I
Okay.
was like, okay, the bar is very low, one. And two, like that just screams insecurity to me.
Yeah.
If you don't trust the other person to be friends with your friend in social media, like then what are you doing?
Yeah. And that's a right. Wouldn't I can only speak for myself, but like I would want my friends or like my significant other and my friends to kind of know each other and be able to
Mhm.
get along and because you have to kind of blend your worlds together a little bit and
Exactly.
kind of and
Yeah,
social media.
exactly. So, but I only bring this up because like that's something I would never consider, but I guess it's something that could cause problems in a
Yeah.
relationship. So, do you run into a lot of that kind of? I think it's petty, but like, do you run into a lot of stuff like that?
Oh, yes. There's a lot of people complaining of people looking at other people's pictures or like what accounts they follow and things like
Mhm.
that. And I think we've gotten away from like what social media is,
Yeah.
right? Like it's entertainment and all this stuff and like blended it into our real life and have taken on so much pressure for it. Cause
Yeah.
it's like, why are all these people following you? Why are you following all these people? How do you know this person? And if
Yeah.
we're focusing so much on all that stuff, it's like we're missing everything else. And it can get very petty very quickly, right? People post stories to try to make the other person jealous and like
Yeah.
all these
Exactly.
things that we don't need to be doing, but we end up doing it.
And you sort of make social media your real life instead of just
Yeah.
leaving it there.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay, good question. Are you able to notice when a couple is not going to make it? Like, I don't know if as soon as like the first session, but eventually, do you know?
Um, yes and no. It depends. It all goes back to that first conversation I have of like what the goal is.
Yeah.
And the way I structure couples therapy, it might be very different than other people's, and it might not be the right way. But when I first meet a couple, I meet with them together. And then when I meet with them the second time, I meet with them half and half the session individually.
Okay.
And that's when I ask a lot of the harder questions because the first time meeting a therapist is absolutely terrifying, and we're not going to open up right away.
Yeah.
But that's when I kind of find out like where each person's at because what they say together the first session is usually very, very surface, like very timid on what they actually are feeling. So usually about like the third session or so, I know for a fact that they're on completely different pages or reading completely different books. And
Yeah.
then I know that they're kind of like they'll admit sometimes like, oh, I'm just here because I had to be here, or this is our last chance or step before divorcing, so I'm just here
Yeah.
checking the box. um, and then I kind of know like, okay, we're not really trying to try, we're just here to be here. And then we kind of get a sense a little bit that they're not gonna make it.
Yeah.
But it depends on the couple. Sometimes they really turn it around and surprise you and will actually put the work in because
Yeah.
it's a lot of work.
And tell me something. Is it, I guess it's not ethical, but is it allowed for you to suggest a separation? Like, it's just not going to work out, guys.
I try not to give my opinion that much in those situations just because when you're building like a therapeutic relationship with someone, it can be very I don't want to say not demanding, it's not the word I'm trying to think of. I don't know, we can become very reliant on our therapist to like make decisions for us. And I don't want to ever make that decision for somebody else. And sometimes that does happen because they'll
Yeah.
say at the end of the first session, oh, so do you think we're going to make it? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know how much work you're going to put in.
Okay.
Um, so it's really hard to like be that deciding factor. So unless it's like a dangerous situation, then I'll have that kind of conversation of like, all right, cops are being called, like maybe we need to remove ourselves from the house and kind of separate that way. But I usually try to avoid that topic of like, hey, you guys need to divorce.
Yeah.
Like it
Uh,
doesn't, I don't want that responsibility.
yeah, because you don't want them to blame you down the line.
Yeah.
Okay, and also, how do you remain neutral in, like, I know that some situations it's easy to do that, but I mean, when someone is just wrong, how can you remain neutral?
It's hard. Sometimes you, because like we're human too, right? Sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, I see their point and trying to like help them relay the message. A
Yeah,
lot of it is a lot of reflecting. I have to make sure that I am reflecting what I'm hearing the one partner say and trying to get the other partner to kind of reflect what they're hearing and trying to get them to communicate with each other.
yeah.
That's a big piece that I do. Like the more you work with a couple or even just an individual, you try to get them to kind of communicate without having to utilize me. So then I don't necessarily have to be such a big part of the conversation that's going on.
Okay, perfect. So you just like steer the conversation.
Yeah, it's a lot of directing and steering.
Perfect. Okay. What's some advice you would give a couple if they want to cool off in the middle of an argument?
Ooh, that's a really good one. My biggest piece of advice for that is having that conversation when everyone is calm.
Mm,
It is not a conversation that you can have in the middle of being upset or in an argument. This is a conversation that needs to happen either in therapy or if anybody is just having this problem in their relationship. When everyone's level headed, everything's been feeling okay, have that conversation of what do I need when I'm feeling upset? And like, what do you need when you're feeling upset? So some people are very anxious in the fact that they want to finish the argument right here, right now. I need it to be resolved. Other people need time to process. Some people blow up, right? They get really loud and defensive. Some people start shutting down. So having that conversation when we're not in an argument is great because then we can know, all right, we need a safe word, whether it's like in the middle of it, we're just like, all right, time out. And
yeah,
everyone takes their time or whatever that is. Or if we say, all right, I've been really frustrated. I need a day by myself or an afternoon or whatever. Figuring out what both of you do when you're upset is a great conversation to have to figure out what you guys need once you start getting to that like escalation point.
so I guess, and I don't believe in this, but do you believe in the don't go to sleep angry?
Sometimes it depends on your type of brain and thought process. Sometimes we need more than a day to process.
Yeah,
I heard when like a long time ago somebody say, if something's bothering you and you sleep on it and the next day it's still bothering you, speak up.
yeah,
And if something's bothering you and you sleep on it and it's not bothering you the next day, then it obviously like was not hurting you or like upsetting you as much as you thought it was in the moment.
yeah,
So sometimes we need that time to process because we all think about things differently. And we're sometimes, if we have anxious brain, we're like, oh, it wasn't as a big deal as I thought it was. And I saved myself an argument.
yeah. Because sometimes you're just tired and they
Mhm.
want to keep going at it, and you're just, I just want to sleep. Just let me
Yeah.
know. We can talk about it tomorrow. So that's why I don't believe in don't go to sleep angry. You're like, just
Yeah.
go to sleep angry. Like it's okay. I think so.
Yeah.
But have you ever been too shocked to continue a session? Like something comes up and you're like, wow.
Um, Not for myself. I've had people like storm out of the room. So like we
Okay.
couldn't really continue a session. Or people are just like, all right, F this, I'm done. And they kind of just they're just like, yeah, this isn't working. I'm good. And they kind of just leave. So that does happen sometimes. And that's a little more shocking, like when that does kind of explode like that.
And do you try to get them to come back, or you just accept the fact that they give up on the process?
It depends on the rapport I have with the person. There have been people who have that is their reaction to things. So I understand that that's their reaction to things, and they can kind of calm themselves down in return. If it's someone that I don't really have that like rapport with, or if it's a couple that um, is fighting a lot, like especially in session, whoever stays in the room, I usually kind of try to like refocus and calm them down and like ground them a little bit and kind of have a conversation with them about what they want to do going forward.
Okay.
So it kind of depends on what's going on with the people.
Okay. So here's another question. Do you
Yeah.
think trust can be regained if in the past there were actions that caused it to be broken?
Ooh, that's a good question. That is a piece of where I would recommend individual therapy and working on things ourselves. Um, Trust is a huge important thing, but I also think trust goes hand in hand with communication. And obviously, I've been preaching communication the whole time. Um, but we have to, and I've said this to couples before, and they don't normally like this question, but if we're looking for a reason why to be mad at someone, like if we're not going to work towards like forgiving ourselves for something or letting something go or working towards rebuilding the relationship, we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah.
So sometimes people do things that we don't appreciate or don't like, or we break the trust, but we have to decide right then and there, like, are we willing to work towards it? And are we willing to let go of that anger?
Okay.
Because that it'll be a huge defining factor if we actually move through the pain and start healing, or if we're going to sit with it because we want to continue to be angry about it.
Yeah. And how important is it to give in relationships? Like you said, sometimes you just have to let go of the hurt and start healing.
Mhm.
How important is it to just give in and put the other person first at some point?
I don't know if I definitely call it like giving in. A lot of times people misconstrue what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is something that we do for ourselves because we're the ones holding on to that anger. We're the
Yeah.
ones, the way I describe it to clients is it's like a backpack full of rocks that we carry around. So when we're upset with someone or if they've wronged us or something's happened, and this can be in any type of relationship, right? Family, friends, significant others. We carry that backpack full of rocks every single day because we are so hurt.
Yeah.
And when we start forgiving, we decide to start unpacking those rocks slowly so
Yeah.
then we can start healing. Forgiveness is never for the other person. It's
Yeah.
for ourselves. And that's a very big misconception because somebody will make a mistake and say, oh my gosh, please forgive me. And they're trying to kind of make themselves feel better. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, I need to work through this and I need to forgive the situation.
Exactly. Yeah. Because
So it can be hard.
yeah, and because it's also so easy to say, okay, yes, I forgive you, but if you don't do the work, like the other
Yeah.
person is just gonna go on with their life, and you hold on to that bag of rocks.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
that other person's not necessarily going to continue to be upset about the situation we are. Or if we're just throwing around that, like, oh, I forgive you, it's fine. That's a big one. Like, oh, it's okay. And we're not communicating.
Yeah.
This same situation is going to come up again because now it's like a pattern because it's part of our habits. If we're not communicating about what's going on, we're just going to keep doing similar things because we're creatures of habit
Yeah.
and we have to start changing our habits. And it can be a little complicated, but forgiveness is one of the hardest um, works to do, I guess. I don't know if I would call it works, but like when we start deciding that we are ready to forgive, that's a lot of work on us. And it takes a long time. And sometimes we're not ready to forgive. Sometimes we're not ready to let things go or heal from things yet. And that's completely okay. But in regards to partners, that other partner is like, okay, like let's move on, let's go. And that makes it more complicated.
Yeah, because they don't allow you to have your time with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think it's necessary to, and this is not like couples oriented or anything, but is it necessary to forgive in order to forget?
So forgetting is completely different, right? We can forgive someone for a situation or an action, but we don't necessarily have to forget just because if we're looking at people and patterns and situations like that, like we know that that was there, like that did happen. And that part of healing, and I don't know if you've experienced this with therapy and stuff like that, when we can forgive people, um, we know that they did us wrong and things like that, but we are coming in a place of like treating them like a human or like knowing that they're just a human and they kind of made mistakes or they did the best they could. So it's a big thing of kind of, especially if we're like dealing with parents and stuff, but we're trying to forgive our parents for the mistakes they made teaching us while we were growing up, right? Like we know things that happened, but we have kind of adapted and been able to forgive them.
Yeah,
Just, we remember things that they did.
exactly. Okay, good. Yeah, because you just like you said, you set patterns when you
Mhm.
forgive, if but you shouldn't forget so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and that's where that communication piece really comes into it because it's like, all right, I recognize that you keep doing the same thing over and over again. Like, what changes are we going to start making? Because we need to make a change.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay, so the last question is, well, they asked for newlyweds, but I think we can do it like generally. What do you think are the most important, let's call them foundations for a healthy relationship? We said communication.
Yeah, communication, I think, especially once people start having kids or get super busy, having quality time together and figuring out what that looks like for each person. I also think people having their own hobbies or things that they enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
A lot of times we get wrapped up in our relationships or our families and we feel that sense of losing our identity. So
Okay.
that's a really important piece too of kind of keeping that spark alive in ourselves and in our relationship. Having really good boundaries is great. That's something that you can work a lot on in therapy.
Yeah.
And having really good fighting rules. So if you are having an argument, making sure you're both being fair and like learning how to listen to each other and kind of be able to communicate effectively because people think anytime you fight, it's a bad relationship.
Hmm.
But we're supposed to disagree. We can't always be on the same page. We can't not have conversations where we have different opinions. So being able to disagree politely or
Yeah.
work through a conflict is going to be amazing for every couple.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Those foundations work for me. I
Yeah.
agree with all of them.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. Perfect. Well, that was the last question. I don't know if there's any other advice you want to add.
I really kind of paying attention to how we communicate to people would probably be my biggest piece of advice. Obviously, I keep preaching communication. If we notice that we are a person that shuts down when we're arguing, or if we don't speak up and let someone know when something's bothering us, or if we criticize our significant other, kind of paying attention to how we speak to other people can really help us figure out what we need to help change those arguments, those patterns, those communication tactics that we already have set in place.
Perfect. I think that's great advice. Well, the truth is, you changed my mind right like for the third question, but this was great.
Yay!
So yeah, I might be open to couples therapy in the future if it's ever necessary.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Erin, for doing this. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I don't know, do you have an Instagram where people can follow you for more advice or for like for therapy consultations or stuff like that?
Yeah. So I'm currently working out of North Carolina. So I do offer telehealth for anybody that's in North Carolina. It's at Anchor Psychological. And then my therapy Instagram is Erin Goes Mental. I share a lot of like memes and funny things because I think we can kind of enjoy all of our mental health journeys and things like that. So it's not super serious, but it definitely gets points across.
Perfect. I'll tag it right here, and people can go ahead and follow you.
All right,
Well,
awesome.
yeah, thank you so much again, Erin. This has been amazing.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
See you soon.
All right, bye.